Let's be real. Knowing when to stop editing can be harder than knowing how to start. You open up Lightroom with good intentions, make a few adjustments, and suddenly, you've spent an hour tweaking shadows on one image that looked great 45 minutes ago. Sound familiar? This episode is all about learning to recognize that tipping point, where refinement turns into over-editing and clarity gets replaced with chaos. Whether you're just starting out or you've been at this a while, learning when to walk away from the sliders is one of the most powerful editing skills you can build. So if you've ever looked at your final gallery and thought, did I go too far? This one's for you. There's a moment in every editing process where you hit a fork in the road. One path says, this looks great, call it done. The other says, just a little more, maybe adjust the warmth, or boost the contrast, or retouch that one corner you didn't even notice until now. And before you know it, you've gone from a beautiful, clean edit to something that feels off. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes the colors feel too forced, or the subject looks too smooth, or the light looks fake even though the original image didn't need much help. This happens to every photographer at some point, especially when you care deeply about your work. But knowing when to stop editing, that's a skill, and it's one that can dramatically improve your speed, your consistency, and your client satisfaction, if you're willing to practice it. A lot of the pressure to over-edit comes from a good place. You want your photos to look their best. You want your client to be blown away. You want your portfolio to stand out. But underneath that desire is often a layer of doubt. Maybe the original image wasn't as sharp as you wanted. Maybe the lighting was tricky. Maybe you saw a photographer on Instagram with insanely vibrant tones, and you're wondering if your work looks too plain in comparison. So you start nudging sliders, layering filters, retouching small things that probably didn't need to be touched at all. It's a slippery slope. And the worst part? The more you edit, the harder it becomes to know if you're actually improving the image or just changing it. One of the first signs that you've crossed into over-editing territory is when your subject no longer looks like themselves. Their skin is too smooth. Their eyes are overly bright. The shadows under their nose or chin are gone completely. In your effort to make the image better, you've removed the very things that make it feel real. And while it's tempting to smooth everything out or brighten everything up, clients will notice when they don't recognize themselves in the final photo. They might not say anything directly, but they'll feel it, and that subtle disconnect can eat away at the trust you've worked so hard to build. The truth is, most people don't want perfection. They want authenticity. They want to look like the best version of themselves, not like a magazine ad or an AI render. That's why learning to stop at enough is one of the most important editing habits you can form. It's not about being lazy, it's about preserving the integrity of your subject and the emotion of the moment. One way to get better at stopping before you go too far is to build in intentional pauses during your editing process. After you've done your base adjustments, exposure, white balance, contrast, maybe some light color work, step away, even if it's just for a few minutes. Get a glass of water, check on your dog, stretch your legs, then come back with fresh eyes and ask, does this image need anything else? Or am I just trying to fix something that's not actually broken? More often than not, you'll find that your first instinct was solid. You just needed space to trust it. Another helpful tool is the before and after toggle in Lightroom. I know it's basic, but it's powerful. Regularly checking your edits against the original image helps you see if you're enhancing or overhauling. If your final image looks dramatically different in a way that feels disconnected, if the skin tone has shifted too far from reality, or the highlights are now completely blown out, that's your cue to dial it back. Editing should feel like you're polishing a gemstone, not trying to replace it entirely. One thing I see a lot of photographers do, especially newer ones, is fall into the trap of pushing every image to match a specific aesthetic, even if that aesthetic doesn't fit the image. Maybe you've seen a moody, desaturated style that looks amazing in studio portraits, so you try to apply it to a sunny family session at golden hour. Or maybe you love warm tones and apply them across the board, even when the original scene was cooler and more neutral. The result ends up feeling unnatural, like the edit doesn't belong to the moment. And the reason it feels off is because editing isn't just about look, it's about context. A dramatic edit that fits one scene might feel completely out of place in another. So if you find yourself trying to make every session match a specific preset or style, pause and ask, is this edit serving the story of this image, or just serving my own desire to be consistent? Consistency is important, but not at the expense of accuracy. Your style should support the subject, not override it. That's especially true when you're photographing families, newborns, or weddings, moments where emotion and memory are at the core of the image. Over-editing can dilute those things. It can flatten out the subtle cues that make a photo feel alive. The tiny crease in a newborn's foot, the texture of a mother's hand, the catchlight in someone's eye as they laugh. When we over-edit, we risk losing those details, and with them, the very soul of the image. Another area where over-editing tends to sneak in is skin. Skin is one of the hardest things to edit well because we're so used to seeing highly retouched skin in ads, magazines, and social media filters. That visual baseline warps our sense of what natural looks like. So when we start editing skin, especially close-ups, we often go too far. We smooth it until there's no texture left. We brighten it to the point where it glows unnaturally. We remove every shadow, every line, every hint of reality. And even though it might look flawless from a distance, up close it feels hollow. It doesn't feel like a person anymore. It feels like a doll. The goal with skin editing should never be to erase. It should be to soften, to balance, to bring focus back to the eyes or the emotion. If someone has acne or redness or temporary irritation, yes, we can address that. But we're not trying to pretend the skin is made of porcelain. Leave the pores. Let the light fall naturally. Let there be depth and structure in the face. Those things are what make your subject look like themselves, and that's what they'll recognize and appreciate. And while we're on the topic of recognizing things, your own editing tendencies deserve a look too. Most of us have patterns we're not even aware of. Maybe you always add a little too much contrast. Maybe you push skin tones too warm. Maybe you over-sharpen out of habit. These tendencies aren't necessarily bad, but they can become overdone if you're not paying attention. One exercise I recommend is looking at your last 10 sessions and comparing them side by side. Do you notice any patterns? Any spots where things start to look a little too edited? You might be surprised by what you find. Self-awareness is key to avoiding the overdone look, and it's something you can build with practice. You might also find that over-editing happens more when you're editing while tired or distracted. When your brain is foggy, you tend to rely on extremes. More warmth, more saturation, more contrast, because subtlety feels harder to gauge. That's why editing when you're rested, focused, and in a good headspace makes such a difference. You're more in tune with what the image actually needs. You're less likely to keep tweaking out of frustration or second-guessing. So if you find yourself spiraling on a gallery, constantly re-editing the same photo, it might be time to take a break. Close the program. Go do something that resets your brain. Come back later and ask yourself, with fresh eyes, if all those tweaks really helped, or if you were just trying to force something that didn't need to be changed. There's also an emotional layer to all of this, and it ties directly into what I call edit anxiety. That's the worry that your work won't be enough, that someone will see the raw photo and think you're not talented, that your client will notice every tiny imperfection, that your portfolio won't measure up. And so you edit to cover that fear. You overpolish, you add just a little more of everything. More clarity, more contrast, more saturation, hoping it'll mask whatever insecurity you're feeling underneath. But here's what I've learned, both from my own experience and from mentoring photographers over the years. Editing can't solve imposter syndrome. It can't fix your self-doubt. The only way through that is to keep showing up, keep doing the work, and keep trusting that your unpolished, authentic version of a moment is more than enough. Editing is supposed to enhance your vision, not override your instincts. If you felt something when you took the photo, your edit should amplify that, not bury it. And often the best way to preserve that original feeling is to stop sooner than you think you should. To let the image breathe, to let it be real. So, how do you actually know when an edit is done? That's the real question, isn't it? It's easy to say, trust your gut, or stop before you go too far. But when you're in the middle of a project, those lines can blur fast. What feels done 1 minute might feel unfinished the next. That's why I recommend building your own set of check-in points, little moments throughout your editing process that help you evaluate whether the image is finished or if you're just stuck in that loop of perfectionism. One of the most helpful questions you can ask yourself is, what am I trying to say with this photo? That might sound dramatic, but every image communicates something. Maybe it's warmth, maybe it's connection, maybe it's calm or joy or intimacy. When you know the feeling you're trying to highlight, it becomes easier to stop editing once that emotion is coming through clearly. If the image feels joyful and clean and true to the moment, and you've got that feeling locked in, what are you really trying to add by pushing it further? More often than not, the answer is nothing. That's when it's time to hit export. Another strategy is to look at the edit from a client's perspective. This doesn't mean dumbing down your work or editing to the lowest common denominator. It means stepping out of your own head for a second. Your client isn't analyzing skin tone shifts in the shadows. They're looking at the expression on their child's face. They're remembering how the wind felt during that maternity session, or the way their partner laughed when they weren't expecting to. If your edit supports that memory, if it enhances what they felt when the image was taken, you've done your job. Editing isn't about impressing other photographers. It's about delivering work that resonates with the people in the photos. That said, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that every photo has to be portfolio perfect. And I get it. You want your gallery to shine. But not every image is meant to be a showpiece. Some photos are about the moment, not the polish. A slightly imperfect image can still be the most meaningful one in a session. That candid shot with soft focus but perfect emotion, don't over-edit it, trying to make it worthy. Let it stand on its own. In fact, sometimes pulling back and doing less can let the emotion shine through more. Clean up what's distracting, but don't erase the soul in the process. Editing restraint isn't a lack of creativity. It's the expression of maturity. It means you've developed the discipline to let a photo breathe, to let it be what it is without trying to mold it into something it's not. There's something really powerful in holding back, in saying, this is enough. That kind of confidence doesn't always come quickly, but it does come. It comes from experience, from making mistakes, from over-editing a gallery, and then realizing you liked the raw versions better. We've all been there. We all learn through trial and error. There's also a subtle shift that happens as you gain more experience. Early on, you edit because you want to prove something. To your clients, to yourself, to other photographers. You think that adding more to your edits will add more to your value. But eventually, you start editing to preserve the integrity of the image. You're not proving anything anymore. You're supporting the photograph. You're letting it speak for itself. And that shift is when your style really begins to solidify. Because it's no longer about chasing trends or fixing every flaw. It's about trusting your voice. I think that's especially important in today's editing culture, where a lot of what we see online is heavily processed. Vibrant, punchy tones, hyper smooth skin, skies that don't look real. There's a time and place for all of that. But if you're trying to build a timeless portfolio, you have to learn to resist the urge to follow every visual trend. What's trendy now might feel outdated next year, but photos that feel real, those never go out of style. So when you're editing, ask yourself, will this still feel beautiful to me 5 years from now? Will it still feel honest to the subject, the light, the mood? If the answer is yes, then that's a good place to stop. It also helps to have someone in your life, another photographer, a mentor, even a non-photographer friend who you trust to give you honest feedback. Sometimes we're too close to our own work to see it clearly. We start thinking, this needs more contrast, or this isn't sharp enough, when in reality, we're just spiraling. Having someone you trust to say, that's great, don't touch it, or you've gone too far, pull it back, can be really grounding. You don't need feedback on every gallery, but when you're experimenting with something new or feeling unsure, That outside perspective can help you find your stopping point more confidently. If you're running a photography business, there's also a practical reason to learn this skill: time. The more time you spend over editing, the less time you have for everything else: marketing, connecting with clients, shooting, resting. If you want to build a sustainable business, you can't afford to lose hours fiddling with tiny details no one will notice. And here's the thing: clients don't book you because you're the fastest editor or the most precise. They book you because they trust your eye. When you start owning that, you realize that over-editing isn't about quality, it's about control. And when you let go of that need to control every pixel, you get your time and your confidence back. That doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean you stop trying. It means you're choosing quality over perfectionism. You're focusing your energy on edits that actually matter: exposure, color, emotion, instead of chasing impossible standards. When you know what's enough, you start to deliver better work, faster, with more heart behind it. And if you're worried about letting go of those extra tweaks because they've become part of your habit, try running a little experiment. Take one recent session and challenge yourself to edit with restraint. Use your base preset, correct exposure and white balance, make minimal adjustments, and stop, then walk away. Come back the next day and compare it to one of your heavily edited galleries. Which one actually feels better? Which one preserves the feeling of the shoot more accurately? Which one feels like you? You might be surprised to find that less really is more. This is especially true when it comes to editing for consistency. You don't need every image to match exactly. You need the gallery to feel cohesive. And often, trying to make every image match too perfectly can lead you right back into the over-editing zone. A small shift in light or color across a session is natural. If you spend too long trying to make every photo identical, you risk flattening the nuance that makes each frame feel alive. Clients aren't looking for uniformity. They're looking for harmony. Let that guide your edits. If you're someone who loves the editing process, and I mean really loves sitting down with Lightroom or Photoshop and getting into the zone, it can be hard to stop simply because editing feels fun. You're not necessarily over-editing out of fear or pressure. You're just enjoying the craft, and that's valid. But even then, there's value in saving a clean, client-ready version of your gallery first. Then, if you want to go back and play, try new tones, experiment with color grading, explore a creative direction, you can do that without compromising your original vision. Think of it like sketching. Not every drawing goes in the final portfolio. Some edits are just for you. And that's a beautiful part of the process, as long as you know where that line is. Ultimately, knowing when to stop editing comes down to clarity. Clarity about your intention, your style, your process, and your audience. You're not editing to prove your worth. You're editing to highlight the heart of the image. When you lead with that, you don't have to second guess yourself. You can step away from the computer feeling proud of what you've made, knowing that you didn't just make it look good. You made it feel right. So next time you're deep in your edits and wondering, should I keep going? Take a breath. Zoom out. Remember what you saw in that moment. Remember what the photo means. And if it's already doing its job, telling the story, holding the emotion, feeling true, then you don't need to do more. You've already done enough. Editing isn't just about what you add. It's about what you leave alone. Trusting your instincts, knowing your intention, and learning when to stop. Those are the skills that elevate your work from technically correct to truly impactful. If this episode gave you something to think about, take it with you into your next editing session. Ask yourself, does this adjustment serve the story? Or am I just chasing perfection? You already have the eye. Now it's about listening to it. Keep showing up, keep refining, and remember, your style grows every time you edit with purpose.